lands of ancient Germania, this tale of blood and betrayal starts with a man, the future chieftain of the Cherusci tribe, Arminius. Arminius was born a prince of the Germanic Cherusci tribe, the eldest son of chieftain Segamer. Although Segamer had no plans of inheritance for his eldest, to secure peace with the Roman Empire that had been looming over Germanic lands, Segamer surrendered his two sons to Rome, Arminius and Flavius, victims of their father's cowardice. Both boys, as child prisoners of Rome, learned of Roman academics and warfare at a young age, later fighting in the Roman army alongside their captors. Arminius eventually being transferred to the Rhine region of ancient Germania. It is there that the seeds of heritage and homeland were planted in Arminius's heart. Now, my friends, we move to Rome. In the year 27 BC, it is January 16th. Octavian, the heir to the great Julius Caesar, was named Augustus by the Roman Senate, first citizen and emperor of Rome. Augustus had eyes for expansion. He cast his gaze upon Germania, the wooded land of the barbarians. With the aid of Marcus Agrippa, Tiberius, who was Augustus's stepson, and Drusus, Germania would be occupied and the barbarians subjugated. It was Tiberius who established his command over the conquered land and treated the peoples with savagery. It was during this time that Arminius and his brother Flavius were handed over to the empire, where Arminius would go on to serve in the ranks of the Roman army. The subjugated Germanic barbarians and political hostages like Arminius would be given their own warbands within the empire's army that would be led by their own Germanic chieftains. In 6 BC, our story takes a turn that would begin the chain of events leading to the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. Tiberius would officially withdraw from his charge of Germania, and in his stead Augustus would appoint Publius Quintilius Varus as commander of the region, eventually granting him the title of governor. Varus was a decorated Roman general, not known for his military prowess, but for his political savvy. Varus would reform Germania in a way that the barbarians began to welcome the Roman occupation. They would even request legion outposts and patrols to be established to ward off crime. It was during this time that Arminius was deployed as an advisor to Governor Varus, soon becoming a close ally and trusted friend to Varus. But these accomplishments of peace and order by Varus would inevitably come undone, and by the hand of none other than his trusted advisor, Arminius. Arminius, rekindling a fire that burned for heritage and homeland, began an undercover orchestration of hit-and-run raids from Germanic insurgent forces. Arminius watched as the Roman Empire continued to subjugate his tribe, the Cherusci, stealing the children away to Rome, people being robbed of their wealth, their land destroyed, ancient sacred forests decimated for timber. It was in a secret glade in a dark forest that Arminius met with the Germanic chieftains to devise a plan that would spell the doom for Roman occupants of his homeland. Arminius, a Roman army veteran, knew the Germanic tribes could not cut the head off the Roman eagle by sheer force. A trap needed to be set. But not all of the chieftains were swayed by Arminius. Many of the tribes would claim a neutral stance, and one chieftain would ultimately unveil Arminius's betrayal to Governor Varus. Segestes, a cowardly chieftain who sought to gain favor from the Roman eagle for divulging the plans of insurrection. Although to Segestes' dismay, Varus would not budge. Arminius was a trusted advisor. Varus did not buy a single word of Segestes' tale and threw him in shackles for the slander against Arminius. A choice by Varus that would spell the doom of him and his legions. Soon after, with the fall season creeping up on the legions, Varus prepared his army for a march back to the Rhineland border to hunker down for winter. But Arminius had other plans. It is here that the first seed of his trap would be planted. News from Arminius would arrive of tribal revolt in the northwestern region of Germania. Arminius would propose to Varus to take the army on a detour through the northwestern territories to crush the rebels on their way back to the Rhineland. Varus would take Arminius's bait and proceeded a forward march of his 3 legions, auxiliary forces, and support elements into the Teutoburg forest. He did not know that this dark forest would become a wooded tomb for him and his legions. Governor Varus's confidence in Arminius was outmatched only by his inept tactical prowess. Under Varus's command, Rome's 17th, 18th, and 19th legions, as well as additional personnel, were making the march northwest, out of formation and at a casual pace. What should have been a disciplined march was a stroll in the woods, with the legions spread out in a column stretching nearly 15 to 20 kilometers. And to add to the incompetence, a thick and fearsome storm swept in on the march, battering the men with heavy rainfall to create an environment of low visibility, the perfect opportunity for an ambush. To top it all off was Varus's neglect to establish reconnaissance on the route ahead. This would be the last nail in the coffin for him and his legions. As the legions marched north through the battering rain, they drew closer and closer upon a swamp-laden path between 2 steep hills. Varus and his legions could either detour through the thickets of the dark forest of Teutoburg, or they could trudge onward. Weighing the dangers of this swampy pass versus the dark forest, Varus ultimately decided to trudge onward through the swamp. One last failure for Varus was once again the neglect of reconnaissance. He could have and should have sent scouts to establish reconnaissance and overwatch atop the 2 hills, besetting each side of the swamp-laden path. Varus's confidence was only outweighed by his incompetence. Without warning, another rain came down upon the legions. Not the rain of a storm, but the rain of javelins. From atop the hills of the pass, the Germanic tribes struck. Javelins rained down on the legions before they could establish shield walls. The Romans attempted a responsive javelin volley, but the hills were too steep. Chaos ensued. Men were being slaughtered. During this ambush, it was none other than Arminius who was the leading voice directing attacks. With the Roman march so spread out and uncoordinated, he recalled his prior military service, using Rome's tactics against the Romans. Arminius was directing a defeat-in-detail maneuver on the spread-out legions, sending small groups of the Germanic tribes to hit and run on the small separated groups of Romans. While the Roman lines were being weakened by hit-and-run maneuvers, javelins continued to fall. From left to right, Romans fell to the rainfall of Germanic weaponry. In response, Varus ordered a defensive line at the base of each hill, while the rest of the march made way through the swamp to dry land. From there, Varus ordered the men on dry land to erect a hasty defense, Roman legions carried their walls with them on march, so in no time a small fortress was erected. It was then that Varus ordered the defensive lines at the base of each of the hills to draw themselves within the walls. The Romans were safe, for now, but many men had perished. Varus and his men sat inside these walls and waited out the night. During the night, Varus's officers tried convincing him to call retreat, turn back, and make way for the Rhineland border to hunker down for the coming winter. But Varus remained steadfast, firmly believing the word and guidance of Arminius, still convinced of a revolt in the northwest region. Varus decided to press on. Through the night, the storm raged on, and continued to near dawn, still battering the legions with heavy rain. It was then that Varus led a hasty movement north to an open field just before the sun had risen above the forest canopy. They had successfully escaped Arminius and his Germanic horde, for now. The Romans constructed another fortification in this open field, knowing the 3 legions would decimate the insurgents in a head-on fight. But Arminius and his following tribes did not bite. The Romans eagerly awaited their enemy, but no sign was shown. Once again, Varus and his legions sat fortified, this time through the day and the night. There had been no letting up from the storm of divine fury, and the men continued to be battered by rainfall. With no choice but to move, Varus once again led a hasty movement north just before daybreak. But this time, Arminius anticipated his movements. Varus led his 3 legions into the northern tree line, funneling his men down a narrow clearing. When upon a bend in this clearing, the Germanic horde emerged to face the legions head-on. Germanic natives, phasing through foliage, ready to reclaim their homeland. No fear of death, with only freedom and glory in their hearts and minds. To the north, the barbarians had constructed an earthen wall from which they hailed javelins from cover. Iron and flesh collided with utter fury. The Romans were bottlenecked, fighting a front of shield walls and raining javelins, while barbarians ran the tree lines, picking off separated legionnaires. Varus's highest-ranking officer, washed with fear and defeat, Legatus Pneumonius Valla, round up his cavalry and cowardly abandon his governor and his legions. Retreating to the south, to his dismay, a squad of barbarians were posted in the southern tree line, awaiting such a retreat. Legatus Pneumonius and his cavalry were slaughtered. As the legions dwindled and the Germanic horde decimated the Roman army, it was clear to Varus there was no hope. Varus, the governor of occupied Germania. Varus, the fool. Varus, the coward, took his own life and left his men to be slaughtered like cattle. His officers soon followed in his wake, falling to their own swords. Between 15,000 and 20,000 dead Romans lay massacred, butchered, and gutted in this dark forest of Teutoburg, victims of their leaders' incompetence through confidence. And then began the true horrors. Arminius and his horde, the victors of this grisly slaughter, now had a duty to fulfill. Thank the gods for their success. Namely Wotan, the Sky Father and the Hanging God. The remaining Romans who had lived through this bloody battle would now wish they had died in combat. The officers were strung alive by their necks upon the mangled trees of this dark forest. Lesser men were butchered and boiled in pots, or had their heads nailed to the trunks of trees. More men as well were thrown alive into the peat bogs, kicking and screaming while they sunk slowly into the murky bogs. Thick peat absorbing their screams, muffling their terror before being consumed by the earth. These sacrifices were of gratitude for the aid of their gods, for I think over those 3 days in this dark forest, Wotan had guided the spears of the Germanic horde, and Wotan guided Arminius' effort. And now, I think Wotan was pleased on the day of Roman terror.